Okay, hi there everyone. This is Jamie Garantziotis. This is the first video I've done for a while since the project with Harrison Kratz on Engage TV. Since launched my blog, and pretty honoured to have as my first kind of one-on-one interview Des Walsh, who's playing around with his camera there and is from the Gold Coast in Queensland. Des, thanks so much for jumping on and having a chat.
Hi Jamie, I'm pleased to be here.
Awesome. So for those of you that don't know, Des is a social media strategist, guru. Is it fair to describe you that way, Des?
I hesitate on the guru, but yeah, I'm a social media strategist, and I also do business coaching. And as for the guru, I think we're all learners, Jamie. You know,
We certainly are.
I think all even what people would be generally regarded as the leading people in this field would still tell you they're learning every day.
We certainly
and I'm in
are.
that camp.
And that's part of the reason that I've got you on. I was lucky enough to connect with Des years ago as a student at Bond University, and we've since been able to develop a relationship which I'm extremely thankful for. And every time I get together with Des, whether it be over Skype or if we're lucky enough to catch up for a coffee on the Gold Coast, which we have been recently, there's always some great discussions, and I'm constantly sitting there kind of thinking, I've got to chat to Des. So the latest thing we talked about, you're about to release a social media course. Now it's targeted at the niche of financial services. So again, a bit of a niche, but I thought there were some really interesting points and thoughts that you have on the wider circumstances that have led you to put the course together. So I was wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about the course and the wider circumstances in social media business communication that have kind of prompted you to put it together.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. The trigger, I suppose, was that I've had a couple of occasions on which I've worked with financial planners. One was a few years ago. I did a couple of workshops with one of the bigger finance companies in Australia, and that was about blogging and about kind of basics of social media, I guess. And then just earlier this year, I was scheduled to, and I did indeed deliver a keynote for a firm of related, sort of a subsidiary firm, if you like, of that other big firm, and they were all financial planners. So they're people who work in various sized businesses, and then they have this affiliation with this bigger company. And I did some, I suppose that I've seen in the last 12 months or so what I call the lost tribes of social media. A lot of the case studies, a lot of the stories about social media are either kind of B2C in terms of big companies, retail, etc., and in music and fast-moving consumer goods and so forth. And then there's also the sort of B2B stuff, but this group, which I call professional services companies, so they're accountants, financial planners, lawyers, and so forth, it's hard to get case studies about them, and it's hard to see examples of where they've been able to use social media effectively. And so I went a bit deeper, and then I started to realise that not just in Australia, but in the UK, in the United States, other countries, no doubt, there are, let's talk about financial planners specifically, because they're really they have particular challenges. You've got, in these developed countries, you've got highly sophisticated regulatory frameworks which make it which are put there to protect the citizens, I guess, from being badly advised by financial planners and wealth managing people. And so there's a licensing process, and there are all sorts of restrictions around what people may or may not do. And then there are professional requirements, ethical requirements and so on. So people get, this is not the only issue for social media, but it is an issue of people saying we're not sure what we can do. And then you have a kind of professional conservatism. And if what I hear from a number of the financial planners I've talked to is true, they tend to be working with, this is a broad generalization, so it could be proved wrong.
Go ahead.
They tend to be working with an older generation, and there's also this kind of assumption, and I hear it back frequently, my clients are not on social networks. My clients don't use social media.
Right.
I'm happy with my newsletter and email that go out.
Sure. Well, I'm glad you mentioned kind of conservatism there, because it was a statement that you brought up when we last caught up for coffee, which was a few weeks ago, and it took me a little bit by surprise, perhaps because whether I'm immersed in social from a human communication or business perspective, but 3 years ago when I was at the PRIA conference, that was the first conference I went to where everything kind of started to focus on social, and it was really heavily focused on social communication, and it seemed to really just gather momentum. That's really 3 years ago now, almost. And when we sat down and we were talking about it, you said, look, by and large, I still don't think that business gets social. Now, could you elaborate a little bit more on that one?
Well, they get that a lot of them get that it can be another kind of marketing tool. What I think a lot of them don't get is that there's, to use the words of the title of Brian Solis's book, which I refer to a lot, the end of business as usual. They don't see it as a new way of doing business. They don't see that there's been whether you call it a rapid evolution or you call it a revolution, there's been a kind of irreversible change in the way we work together, communicate, etc. I mean, you only need to look at this very recent phenomenon of the Coney 2012 thing, that people have been trying for 25, 26 years to catch this guy who has the child soldiers, and they haven't succeeded. And suddenly there are millions of people, literally in 48 hours or whatever it is, watching this video, suddenly becoming aware of this guy and being caught up. Now, we're not going to go into the pros and cons of that particular campaign, but that's an extraordinary, that couldn't have happened in a previous kind of lifetime, or even, I would think, 10 years ago. It's just a totally new phenomenon. And this is not just about marketing. This is about the way people communicate. What I'm finding comes as a surprise to people. I was talking to a guy only a couple of days ago. I said, if you don't want to just communicate with baby boomers and older, like if you're thinking, for instance, about your future clients who may be heirs, for instance, if you're in financial planning, of the people you're currently working with when they pass on, you've got to find how to communicate with those people, because a lot of them don't use email the way you might use it. Really? I said, no. It's a kind of running joke that Gen Ys don't use email. Now, I know that's not completely true, but I had the situation recently. I had to contact a Gen Y young relative, and I had to call her mother and say, tell her to open her email.
And I'm sure she's probably one of the few Gen Ys that you'd have to tell to do that, I'd have to say. Yeah,
okay. So you think they use email a lot?
I think they use it a lot. I mean, from my perspective, and whether I'm an exception because I naturally have an interest in this field, or I'm not sure. And this is where it's hard to generalize sometimes. But from my perspective, and from those that I'm connected with, email, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn messages. I sometimes find that I'm surprised when I look at the last time I actually took a call on my cell phone.
I've been getting the impression from a number of people that if you just rely on email, you're not. To just flip that a bit, if you're only relying on email and newsletters going out by email, you may be missing out. You're probably missing out for a lot of people on other ways they communicate, e.g., Twitter, Facebook, etc. So it's what I'm really, really trying, and I'll take aboard what you've just said, but what I'm really trying to say to these people is you need to look at what, again, if I may quote Brian Solis, he calls the connected customer, which is different from the traditional customer who's happy to get the snail mail updates, the newsletters in the letterbox, and the online customer who goes to a website when they have the website and they check stuff out. There's this other emerging customer across the demographics, more concentrated with the younger groups, obviously, but not insignificant. Figures I showed the financial planners were of internet users in the United States, there's something like 50% of baby boomers are using social networks, and something like 33% of 64 plus, if I can remember correctly. So there's a potential to miss out on ways of communicating.
Oh, so absolutely.
That's about building relationships, not just about marketing.
And when you add up
within the
go ahead.
Sorry. Then there's one more thing is within the company, so that can be whether it's 3 or 30 or whatever, even bigger, and even international companies in professional services, financial planning, etc. There's a whole role of social, as you know, within the company, which is not caught by traditional concepts of marketing.
That's right, and it doesn't only affect external communications, it's internal as well.
Absolutely. And it's collaboration is a really big issue.
Exactly, and as you say, I'm glad you referenced Brian's book. It's a great read and definitely recommend it, but the idea that the organisation can be transformed from inside out, literally, through these tools, and it's a bit spooky. You know, you mentioned email and newsletter and those direct forms of communication. Would you agree that a lot of this is to do with command and control? I know terms you've used before, and it's scary to view this as an area of experimentation or a new area to try, and to begin to perhaps not in one foul swoop hand over that control and command, but to slowly begin to relinquish a little bit and to put the information out there in channels that may not be your strength or your playground, if I can put it that way, but are the areas that your consumers like to engage in.
Absolutely, and that's one of the other big issues for people. So some of the issues for people, financial planners, would be the one you've just mentioned, loss of control. And the response to that, which I try not to be glib about, because I don't feel it's something to be glib about, is it's gone.